Hi there. I am bored. I am procrastinating on more important things, and I'm slightly tired, and I'm a little chilly, clearly. Okay? And instead of doing anything about any of that, except for maybe grabbing a blanket like I have now, I'm going to read Reddit stories. And you're going to listen and probably fall asleep to them. And that's okay. That's what I'm here for, I guess. Anyways, let's get into it. Starting on malicious compliance. A stupid policy was formed as an overcorrection, and I was written up for enforcing it. A few years back, I was a team lead in a call center for a bank. Our building was secure, but policy required any personal information for ourselves or customers be locked up along with the obvious things like passwords anytime we weren't at our desks. A separate compliance group would do random desk checks periodically, and violations would result in write ups for the individual, which also rolled up to leadership. Us team leads were responsible for completing the checks and were frustrated despite our being the ones responsible for the nightly desk checks. One of my peers had the amazing suggestion that no personal information, including photos, knickknacks, that sort of thing, should be allowed except for the small shelf everyone had in their cubicle. The person making this suggestion was a friend and was one of the closers who had to do these checks on a regular basis. I was not, and only had to do these on weekends. I said something to the effect of, "That's the dumbest fucking thing I've ever heard." That's an overcorrection, and no one is going to follow the policy, and it's just making our jobs more difficult. I was written up the next day by my boss, who wasn't there, as her boss was part of that discussion and wanted me disciplined. I observed nearly no one outside of my team was complying by their ridiculous policy. That Saturday, when it was my turn for desk checks, I wrote a detailed breakdown of every single violation. There were dozens. I kept my feelings on the policy out and stuck to the facts. Monday, I was put on a formal warning. That manager wondered why everyone hated her. Wasn't sad when she left or empathized when she was laid off. Wonder why. Someone said, "Sounds like you need to take that formal warning along with a copy of the stupid policy to HR and tell them you are not taking kindly to being written up for checks notes following company policy." This was all years ago, says OP, but another post from the sub came up in my feed and reminded me of this incident. Previous contact with HR about inconsistent application of company or department policy didn't get me anywhere, and I didn't have the energy to try again. Had it led to termination, I'd have probably explored my options, but it didn't come to that. So that's a fun little start, a fun little workplace kerfuffle. Eliminate history? Okay, sure. I worked for a few years at a branch of JP Morgan in Toronto. It was a total shit show because it was clear our division was going down the drain and would be sold off. The director took a bizarre position on a cost-cutting program that head office had going. They wanted all divisions to cut back on voicemail, network storage, and email storage. So, head office had a spreadsheet of the metrics of this cost cutting. The director laid down the law and wanted deep cuts, so our little division appeared at the top of that spreadsheet. The thing was, I worked on small projects, which were often repetitive, so I reused a great deal of information and files from previous projects. This even included voicemails from clients. This information all had to go. That sounded nuts. I told my manager, who was a real suck-up, never questioned directives. He knew this was a stupid idea, but wouldn't admit it. I took a quick pass on everything. I seldom deleted emails, so this was a good idea. I purged as much as I could. Turns out I was one of the biggest users, and now they are making this out to be a problem, which my boss pointed out in my quarterly review. Only company I knew that had quarterly reviews, they bring up in a review my voicemail storage. That was it. I purged all of my voicemails, emails, and file storage. No local storage. I printed out hundreds of pages until my boss noticed, a micromanager, and put a stop it. I'm reading this verbatim, by the way. there's a little bit of, I'm trying to catch them as I go along, but then new projects came up. They were critical of project planning, and I increased my estimates by 10%, which angered my manager. I stepped him through the steps required. Tell me I'm wrong? No. But you can't do that? Then what do you suggest? I just make it up within the tolerances, except that it will take me longer, and you know that. And I had all the requirements annotated over 300 pages. Well, that will take time to review. You know this is nuts, so why do I need to take the hit on this? You know this will end up in my quarterly review. I never made it to my next quarterly review. I found a new job. Good for them, though near the end they seem to have forgotten about spelling. Need merits to go to prom? Let me help. My youngest is in year 11, UK, last year of high school. Can't you tell by my accent? And the school is having a prom for the leavers. While I don't agree with yet another Americanism finding its way over here, I know my daughter is looking forward to it now. It's her turn. This year, however, the school changed the rules so that the students have to earn their way to a ticket with a certain amount of merits given by the teachers. Stupid, idiotic, and frankly unfair. The students have kicked up a fuss, but management is holding firm on it. I'm tired, I'm sorry. The teachers, not so much. Just yesterday, my daughter was given merits by different teachers because your hair looks great, for the way you walked through that door, and because she gave her friend a high five for getting an answer right. Others have been given merits for equally simple and silly things, so the merits given are overflowing. Guess everyone will go to the ball after all. Someone commented, this is a great way to make the students organize their own prom and ignore the school one. Celebrating the last year of school should be about finishing school, not another box-ticking exercise. So true. Department head tried throwing me, little me, under the bus. Department head asked me to prepare for performance reviews for a new product launch and compare them against our existing product. When I crunched the data, the issue was obvious. The existing product significantly outperformed the new one across every key metric, obviously because it had built a legacy and the new one didn't have time to breathe. I raised my concerns that sharing a direct comparison with senior management would undermine the launch and suggested reframing the story about long-term potential and the need for marketing support without spotlighting the old product's stronger performance. He rejected that approach and insisted that the numbers be shared as is, making it seem like I lacked integrity. I documented my concerns and then did exactly what he asked. I posted the full comparison to my senior management, clean data, clear visuals, no interpretation added. The difference in performance was impossible to miss. Senior management reacted quickly and aggressively. The launch strategy was questioned, the investment decision was challenged, and the product team was put under a microscope. During the fallout, the head attempted to distance himself by acting as though he had not yet reviewed the numbers before they were shared. Unfortunately for him, in the timeline, approvals, and a written trail made it clear otherwise. Now he's extremely pissed at everyone and stays in his room. Someone commented, as a product development engineer, I truly recognize and sympathize with this tale. I could always tell how well a product launch was going according to if my manager declared it as, quote, his project. The slightest sign of an issue and it becomes my project. Customer always found a mistake, so we complied. This goes back to around the 1990s. I was an independent designer for a few different printing businesses in the south suburbs of Chicago. Back then, computers were fairly new and print shops were still old school. Those inserts you found in newspapers, they were still hand-lettered back then. I designed brochures and flyers, laser print proofs, scanned photos. A 150 DPI HP scanner was around $1,200. That's like $5,000 today, and so on. Anyway, one of the print shops had a customer that always found an error, would demand a new proof, and not authorize the job until they signed off on the new proof every single time. This line is crooked, this word is too dark, and so on. So we came up with a solution. I'd do two proofs. One was the original, accurate one. The other had an obvious intentional mistake. He'd catch the mistake and ask for a new proof. He'd be told to come back in an hour. It was usually a day or two. He'd come back and be shown the second proof. He approved it every time. Demand that there's always a mistake. Here you go. In software terms, it's called a duck. A feature added for no other reason than to draw management attention and be removed, thus avoiding unnecessary changes in other aspects of the product. This started as a piece of Interplay corporate lore. It was well known that producers, a game industry position roughly equivalent to project managers, had to make a change to everything that was done. The assumption was that subconsciously they felt that if they didn't, they weren't adding value. The artist working on the Queen animations for Battle Chess was aware of this tendency and came up with an innovative solution. He did the animations for the Queen the way he felt would be best, with one addition. He gave the Queen a pet duck. He animated this duck through all of the Queen's animations, had it flapping around the corners. He also took great care to make sure it never overlapped the actual animation. Eventually, it came time for the producer to review the animation set for the Queen. The producer sat down and watched all of the animations. When they were done, he turned to the artist and said, "That looks great. Just one thing. Get rid of the duck." That's hilarious. Someone else commented, "We used to get calls by a woman on a machine. She complained about the keyboard. We had one spare keyboard. I get it out of the cabinet and unbox it and swap it. She loved the new keyboard and said how nice it was. Later, I'd put the old one in the same box for next month when her keyboard was screwing up again and needed replacement. She never figured it out, and the new keyboard was always much better than the old one. This went on for a long, long time." These are fun. I like the stories of all the commenters. Sorry, am I in frame? My grandmother had pretty solid side business as a surveyor. After doing mountain ranges and the sawtooths, putting in fence lines was a piece of cake. On every fence job, he'd put one... I totally read that as grandmother, right? Grandfather, sorry. He'd put one steel fence post in just 6 inches out of place, and he'd only drive it in a few inches. When the landowner came to approve, grandfather would line up the transit and have the customer take a look. Invariably, one post would need to be adjusted. Grandfather would make a big show of pulling it up, giving the grandchild a stern look, and then relocate the post as the customer supervised through the transit. He explained that no landowner will ever be satisfied unless they have the final word, so it's best to have an easy post ready to move. Oh my God. A gold mine, folks. This is a juicy comment. Very long. I used to work as staff on several projects a year for different managers. Sorry, I read that kind of weird. One of our managers, Eric, would always find something wrong during review, but his review notes were incomprehensible. We staff members would pass them back and forth saying, "Do you have any idea what he's asking here? No, he's asking about things that aren't even in this project." So we would have to go to talk with Eric to find out what the hell he was talking about. No talk with Eric ever took less than 30 minutes. You had to shoot the shit with him first, talk about family, talk about other things that were going on, and then finally talk about the project. Here's the thing we noticed. The closer to perfect the deliverables were, the more incomprehensible Eric's objections were, and the longer it took to resolve them. In fact, it would sometimes have to go through as many as 3 rounds of meetings and subsequent arbitrary changes before Eric would be satisfied. So, I tried an experiment. I put a glaring mistake right in the center of one of our documents where it couldn't possibly be missed. Of course, I got an email from Eric to come and see him. We talked about his kid's soccer team, his wife packing his lunch, other stuff that I pretended to be interested in. I gave Eric my full, undivided, enthusiastic attention. After about 20 minutes, he finally said, "Did you notice this error here on the first page?" "Oh, crap, you're right. I'll fix that right away." Yeah, fix that and I'll sign off on it. Eric was happier than I had ever seen him after one of these meetings, and it was the easiest review process I had ever had with him. The other staffers and I, who had been struggling with Eric, conspired to put an error in every project for Eric to find. "No, that won't work," one said. "Just try it," I said. "Just do it and see what happens." What happened is that we would go to shoot the shit with him for 20 minutes, fix the error, and get our project signed off the same way with a minimum amount of drama. Every staffer had the same result. There were different work types, in part based on whether someone is an introvert or extrovert. Introverts expend energy on social interaction. Extroverts get energy from it. Eric was an extrovert. He needed that interaction. He couldn't function without it. When there were no mistakes and no reason to meet, he would fall into a deep form of cognitive dissonance and subconsciously concoct an irrational reason to force a meeting. Once we figured that out and started playing into it, everyone was happier. In fact, at a department meeting a couple months later, Eric spoke up to mention how far the staffers had come along and what great work we were doing. We were actually doing worse work intentionally so that he would have something to correct, but in his mind, we were doing better because we were having better meetings. I kind of wonder if there was some similar deep-seated need to being filled by OP's client's refusal to accept the first proofs. They wouldn't even know they were doing it. That is hilarious. Great story. These are some good ones. I really haven't scrolled this Reddit subreddit before. I probably should. I'm either in charge or I'm not. So I made it so that I was both. This is long, sorry, but there's a lot of upfront information to provide some background for the job I used to hold. I work for a county psychiatric emergency services unit for 8 years, many years ago. Worked. The unit was connected to a hospital, so there were patients referred from the emergency department, but the primary role of the unit was to evaluate patients in their homes, other hospitals, or jails and initiate the civil commitment process if certain legal criteria were met. The unit was open 24 hours a day, running shifts from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., and 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. for the most part. At various times, I worked on all 3 shifts, yikes, and I was very well known. For me, the best part of the job was going out to the other facilities, and I was definitely in the minority on that point. Most of the staff wanted to see patients from our own emergency department. Typically, each staff would handle 1 to 2 cases per shift. If the patient was from our emergency department and could be admitted to our hospital's unit, then that staff might actually work 2 hours of their 8-hour shift, and then they'd spend the rest of the time chatting, answering crisis calls, and largely trying to avoid being assigned another case. I like to be busy and to keep moving, and I found downtime on the crisis unit to be torture. I would routinely take on second cases just to stay active, and this routinely meant that I was staying past my shift end, as I did not like handing cases to other staff members in a shift change because too often information got lost in the mix. The early morning was often dead quiet, with referrals ramping up midday. I requested and was approved to work from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. My new shift was embraced by the rest of the day shift, who predominantly did not want to take outreach cases. Cases were supposed to be assigned based on employee arrival, but within weeks, I would walk into work to find staff that arrived at 7 a.m. sitting around while an outreach case had sat for hours because they, quote, knew I would want to go out on a call right away. Now, this was true, and I didn't care much about that part because I got to leave, but it gives you some idea of the attitudes of the other staff. Now comes the malicious compliance part. Fake names are being used in this instance. Alan, the actual 3 to 11 p.m. shift supervisor, worked another full-time job, and he did not arrive to the unit until around 5:30. Damn. That meant the day shift supervisor, Danielle, would have to give shift report to another staff member who would then pass shift report to Alan. This was usually done the same way cases were assigned. First, 3 to 11 staff would arrive and receive the report, so this interim supervisor would change day to day based on arrival. Over time, though, Danielle started giving me shift report to pass on every day that I worked, despite 3 to 11 staff being present. Because of this consistency, a lot of people mistook me for an actual supervisor, and I was called on by other departments to weigh in on things, to sign off on problem cases, and to provide consults, none of which were part of my actual job. Actual supervisors received a small pay differential, which was largely meaningless, but I mention it here as an arguing point. I was pretty much treated as a supervisor only when it was convenient. When difficult decisions had to be made, or when someone had to get on the phone and argue a clinical decision with another facility, I was in charge, according to the other staff. But if a case came between 3 and 5:30 p.m. and I tried to assign it to a staff member, they would refuse, stating that they would wait for Alan to arrive to assign it because he was the real supervisor, which was fair because I wasn't. But Alan would arrive and see cases that had been sitting since 3 p.m. and want to know why no one had started them. I'd shrug and explain my position, and he would sigh and start assigning work. Meanwhile, other facilities had been calling and asking for updates, as when someone from my unit would be arriving and complaining about delays. John, the unit director, got wind of these complaints and asked to speak to me. I explained the situation, that I was not a supervisor, both in title and in pay rate, and the other staff knew that I did not have any authority to make them work. He told me that he did not have a job title or the funds to give me a supervisor role, which I knew. I told him I did not want to be the interim supervisor every day or ever again, really. John's response was that my judgment was more trusted around our hospital and other facilities compared to many of the other staff, that he liked having someone with more training left in charge. The job required a master's degree, and I was finishing my doctorate, and that I took the job very seriously. Shouldn't all his employees be taking it seriously? Well, John's solution? He walked me back onto the unit, where I'm sure gave the impression that I had gone to John complaining that staff did not listen to me. He asked for everyone's attention and announced that I could sign cases to anyone I wanted. That was it. He could not put it in writing because I had no authority by title, and the reality of the situation was that staff who did not want to listen to me would be supported by human resources for that exact reason. The following 2 days, cases came in, and I asked staff to go. They declined, and we sat and waited for Alan to arrive. On day 3, a call came in at 3:15 from from the farthest hospital away from our facility in our county, a 40-minute drive one way. As soon as I announced the case to the staff, I saw nothing but eye rolls and people going back to crossword puzzles or reading. I suggested 1 or 2 of the staff would be best suited to handle it, and I got no response, not even a no. John said I could, quote, assign anyone I wanted to a case. So I went to the logbook, assigned the case to myself, grabbed the keys to one of the unit vehicles, and left without saying a word. I would often walk around in the hospital so no one questioned me leaving the unit. I also was almost at the facility when I got the first call on my cell phone from the unit. Chris, one of the people I did not supervise, had received a call from our inpatient unit asking for a consult. I told Chris that she should handle it, and I hung up. 20 minutes later, Danny, another not my supervisee, called to say that the inpatient psychiatrist called back asking when the consult would be done. I asked why Chris had not done it, and Danny replied that, quote, the shift had discussed it and felt that it would be better if I dealt with the psychiatrist. I replied that if the consult was urgent, one of them would have to do it because I would not be back for a long time. Danny says, a long time? Aren't you in the ER? I reply, I am at Memorial Hospital. Ask Chris to do the consult, and I hung up. 15 minutes later, John, the unit director, calls me from his home since he leaves at 3. I answer the phone and quickly tell him that I'll have to call him back as I'm in a tense situation with the patient I'm seeing and hang up. John calls the hospital unit where I'm seeing the patient and asks staff to put me on the phone. He asks where I am, and I reply that he just called me at Memorial's inpatient unit. Okay, why am I there? Now, that's the question I've been waiting for. You told everyone on this unit that I could assign cases to anyone I wanted, so I assigned it to me. I told him that I had suggested other staff take it, and nobody wanted it. I could not make them, and it was a priority case as a patient had assaulted 2 other patients and a nurse, and the assaultive patient needed to be moved to a higher level of care as soon as possible. A process that I was almost finished with before the evening shift supervisor had even arrived to assign the case to someone else. The point that John could not argue against was I was not going to sit around waiting while someone else might get hurt. I was not privy to what John said to the other staff afterward, but I was told that he was livid, telling the staff that while I was not a supervisor, entitled staff needed to view assignments for me as being backed directly by him, and refusals would be considered insubordination, which means grounds for suspension or termination. From that point on, staff took the cases I assigned them. If I caught any attitude, I just hold the case up and ask, you or me? And then they would grab the case out of my hand and get to work. Nice. Oh, what an excellent story. That was wonderful. My one main question, commenter asks, why on earth would a staff supervisor be allowed to show up 2.5 hours late every day for their shift? I was thinking the exact same thing. I was genuinely thinking the exact same thing. The OP says, prearranged long before I started working there. He had to stay late to make up the shift. I used his flex schedule as leverage to get my schedule changed to 10 to 6. Smart. Wow. Killer. I love that. Please use the proper channels. All right, bet. An update. Ooh. Let's go to the original, yeah? A few days ago, colleague Y approached me. I am colleague Z. Colleague X has a time-sensitive test he needs me to run. We need parts that don't have any in-house. If we order them, they'll arrive too late and push back a lot of work. So colleague X said I should ask you if you had any we could have. I tell colleague Y that I will check my project area and bring him some if I have any. And then I ask if colleague X has ordered any yet. Yes, but they will be arriving late. Okay. One day later, I'm added to the email chain and add, colleague X, I have 2 of the parts you've requested, and I understand how time-sensitive this test is. I'll bring colleague Y parts you need, and let's swap. When your ordered parts arrive, you won't need them anymore, so I'll take them off your hands because the parts I'm giving you will then be useless after you run your test. Colleague X replies, thanks for the parts. As for the new parts, I'm not responsible for ordering parts for your department. Please use proper channels. What an interesting development. I reply, hello, colleague X. Colleague Y informed me you needed 2 parts to run a test. Unfortunately, I'm not responsible for ordering parts for your department. Please use proper channels. Good luck, colleague Z. The East Coast edit to this. A few days ago, Big Jim approached me. Double skunk, Posthwaite the 7th. Bobby Batterbottom has a time-sensitive... Okay, wait. Hold on. What the hell is going on here? I'm going to go to the other update. I think I wandered into the wrong part of town. What the hell is I just reading there? There's a bunch of edits. I'm not reading all that. Sorry. The next update. So, After my email to colleague X about having my parts if we swapped, colleague X canceled his order to save his department money and then sent his reply to me that he will gladly take mine, but that my department needs to order more of them. I cannot stress this enough. I have no idea why. No idea. Please don't ask me to explain because I don't get it either. The only thing I know is when he was called out on this during the meeting with colleague Y, colleague X could only say different versions of, you said to keep costs down, right? So I kept them down because you said I should. Parts for free internally because you said I shouldn't be buying unnecessary stuff, so I did what you said. Passing the buck to his boss was an interesting strategy. Other arguments were, so I had to order them because colleague Y hadn't told me I needed to get them, which didn't work because they were both informed on the same day by their boss as team lead colleague X was responsible for ordering what was needed. I canceled the order because I had gotten written approval from colleague Z, me, that I could have his department's parts, which fell apart the second I joined in digitally and showed my approval came with the condition that we swap. Again, I don't know what's going on in this guy's head, but it reminds me of something my grandfather, relative of Z squared, used to say. Everyone is promoted to their own level of incompetence. Google the Peter Principle for more info. But not yet. Wait until after the video. So I mentioned yesterday that I was in talks with colleague Y. He sent some of his apprentices over to my apartment to essentially set up his testing area in my department. This was done so we could present a solution during the meeting too. Colleague X is no longer team lead. Colleague Y is. They can use my parts to have the testing done a day earlier than anticipated under the following conditions. Colleague Y is team lead. Vote of no confidence in colleague X in this scenario, and I don't feel comfortable handing my stuff over if he has anything to do with it. My parts don't leave the department. Cost of renting my space for the test is, drum roll please, colleague X and his new boss are now in a meeting with my higher-ups explaining why my project will be a little later, as it's not time-sensitive, as I told colleague X it was, and I have wiggle room, which they do not. And colleague X has purchased 2 new parts that will hopefully arrive in Tuesday's time. Life goes on. Colleague X probably won't be asked to be team lead on much for a while. The embarrassment factor will probably include don't you want to spend more time with your family in the home office with reduced benefits because we don't want you in the office for a month or 3? I hope this was the update everyone was hoping for. Thanks for the love and engagement. Really crazy stuff. That's a good one. He has another East Coast format. So after my email to Bobby Batterbottom, I'm not even going to try. I'm sorry. I can't do that. Oh, God. HR training leads to me getting paid extra. Ooh. Another post reminded me of this story, and I thought I'd share. I work for a major grocery chain. For the most part, they're locked in on following labor laws properly. But every once in a while, they don't know what they're talking about. Before this job, I had been general manager of a high-volume brew pub, and before that I was a GM of a 14-screen cinema. So I also know labor laws pretty well, as both my previous jobs were drowning in employee relations, I bet. A while back, we had a mandatory training for leadership about proper call-out procedures for our teams. In the training, our regional HR asked all the department managers, what do you do if they text you? I said, ignore the text. HR said, no, you need to tell them to call out on our call-out line. Let them know that they need to leave their name, employee ID, and their shift. I said, do I have to? HR said, yes. I said, okay, but would you email us this information after the class? They did. About 3 months later, I had a new employee somehow get my phone number, which bothered me, but that's another story, and text me that they couldn't make it in that day. I text back, call the call-out line, leave your name, employee ID, and shift. The next day, when I was at work, I put in a timekeeper request for an hour of labor. This also happened on a Wednesday, in a week where Wednesday was my only day off. Where I live, if you work even a single minute off the clock, the company is obligated to pay you for that hour. In addition, because I was scheduled 6 days already, that counted as another day of work. So my entire Sunday shift was time and a half. Ooh, damn. As it was 7 days in a row during the full Monday to Sunday work week. About a week later, I was called into HR to discuss what they claimed was me abusing the system, and they wanted to write me up for it because that one text message resulted in $200 of extra money on my paycheck. 40 an hour, so 8 hours at a time and a half is 160 plus the 40 on Wednesday. You get it. I let them know that they were the ones who told me to work on my time off, and that if they wanted to punish me for it, they could see me in court and they'd pay a hell of a lot more. I then reminded them of the email they sent telling us in detail what we were to do if an employee texted us to call out. I told them that I value my work-life balance, and even a minute of work is still work, and I expect to be paid for each moment of work I do. They said, my boss insisted we cut out the middleman to save 15%, so I let him handle the logistics of a 40-foot container. I work as a purchasing manager for a mid-sized home goods retailer. We have used the same domestic importer for our seasonal decor for 5 years. They charge a markup, but they handle the customs, the quality checks, and the shipping. It's hassle-free. My new director of operations is convinced that he is a business genius. He called a meeting last month and lectured to me about how we are hemorrhaging money by using a local distributor. He told me to cancel our contract for the holiday shipment and go direct to the source. I warned him. I told him that dealing with freight forwarders, tariffs, someone comments, hey, look, fair play to him for recognizing his mistake and coming back to you. We learn the most expensive lessons the best. It's good. That's a good lesson to end it on. I hope you all had a relaxing time. Maybe you even fell asleep. Wouldn't that be nice? In that case, when you wake up, give me a like and a subscription, por favor. And we will catch each other later. Have a wonderful night.